Sup, guys? The slump continues. 0-2 yesterday. I don't know what else to say about that. I'm not going to have any plays today. We got a short baseball card. I'll talk about it briefly. There are a few games. I can just point out a few things here. This is a very short card, actually, so I might wind up covering most of these games because there aren't that many of them. Cleveland and Detroit both didn't play yesterday. They were playing each other, and there must have been a rain out or something because they wound up not playing yesterday. So you have those bullpens more intact than maybe their opponents are because they're both now facing opponents that did play yesterday. Cleveland's got Ben Lively starting, and he's just kind of a guy that just back end of the rotation kind of comes in, keeps you in the game, And Baltimore has not decided on a pitcher yet. Cleveland's sitting at minus 120. Take that for what you will. I don't know. It's possible that if Baltimore comes out and they decide to put in some back-end rotation guys, some bad pitcher, you might be looking at Cleveland potentially having a little bit of an edge there. So, I don't know. You'll see about that. Kansas City is facing Detroit. Kansas City is favored by a decent amount. They're up from minus 153 to minus 158 as a road favorite. So that's a pretty heavy price on Kansas City. Maybe too much of a price given that they played yesterday and Detroit did not. But the starting pitching matchup, I think, is probably a mismatch. Seth Lugo's pitching. Kansas City's public with 80% of the cash, but 80% of the tickets, but 96% of the cash. So it looks like there is some cash coming in and moving the line up on Kansas City. Seth Lugo pitching for Kansas City. He's been pretty good all season, basically, and he's got good numbers against Detroit, too. So I don't know if I'd want to go against him. Keter Montero is pitching for Detroit. I believe he's a rookie. He's a young guy, and he had a couple of good starts. He had a bad debut, and then he had a couple of pretty good starts, but since then he's kind of regressed a little bit and had a couple of bad starts. So then it's like, well, what are you going to get from him? It's a mystery. You don't really know. He's got a decent strikeout walk ratio, but he's been getting hit a little bit too much, giving up too many runs. You could potentially just fire a shot on Detroit, just hoping that Montero gives you something. And the fact that Detroit didn't play yesterday might give them a little bit of an edge in that regard. But obviously, Kansas City's the better team. The line's telling you that. The line's telling you Lugo is the better pitcher. But is that line too hefty a price? Maybe, because Kansas City is actually not a very good road team. They're a much better home team than road team. They have the biggest home-road dichotomy in baseball, I'm pretty sure, as I mentioned that a little while ago. So, again, take all this for what you will. Atlanta is probably in the worst spot, actually. They're returning home from a road trip. So I don't exactly love the spot that Atlanta is in. They're in Milwaukee last night. Their road trip, I think, was at least 2 series, right? Yeah, it didn't take them too far. They went to New York and then Milwaukee, but they played the Mets and the Brewers, so those are pretty good teams. Now they're returning home to face a very bad Miami team, and Atlanta is public. They're a big favorite at home, obviously. It looks like it opened minus 120, but that was probably when the odds makers didn't know what the starting pitching matchup was going to be. Atlanta is sitting at minus 190 now, 75% of the tickets, 87% of the cash. So they're public. Looks like they're drawing a little bit more of the cash, although I don't actually agree with the Atlanta side in this one. As I said, they returned home from a road trip, so I never really want to be on a team that's returning home from a road trip, especially when they're facing a team that they're probably not going to be focused on, which is this bad Miami team. And the pitching matchup isn't really the worst for Miami, to be honest. Miami, what are they doing? They're in Tampa Bay, and now they're going to Atlanta, so their travel is actually less. But Miami has Max Meyer pitching. I've talked about him on the show. He's a young guy. I think he might be a rookie, and he's pitched pretty well this season, really, given the fact that he's a rookie. His stats are actually pretty decent. 3 ERA, 0.95 whip. That's pretty good. 17.5 strikeout walk ratio, 15 hits allowed in 21 innings. That's pretty good. He only made it 4 innings in his last start, though, against Milwaukee. Wasn't the best start. It was his worst start, actually, so far. He pitched pretty well in all of his other starts. Problem is that one of those starts was actually against Atlanta already. So that's the one thing that kind of keeps me away from wanting to come in and play Miami and maybe take them like plus 1.5 runs or something like that, because Max Meyer doesn't have that unfamiliarity edge against Atlanta as much anymore because he faced them. It was a while ago. It was back on April 13th. So Max Meyer was out of the rotation for a while, and then he came back. So you could see that Milwaukee game is maybe Meyer kind of working his way back in. So maybe we'll see some improvement on him. Maybe you can't take that much away from that because it was his resuming pitching again in the majors. So it's kind of like when you throw out that first start of the season, it doesn't really matter as much. So you could maybe do that there. But like I said, the start before that, although it was back in April, Atlanta did see him. And Meyer did well. 6 innings pitched, 1 earned run allowed, 7 strikeouts, no walks, and one earned run, and 6 hits allowed. Pretty good start for Meyer, but that was when he had the unfamiliarity edge because Atlanta, I don't think, had faced him yet. Now they have, so that unfamiliarity aspect goes away a little bit, but I still lean to the Miami side a little bit in that one. Charlie Morton is pitching for Atlanta. He's obviously not their best pitcher. He's coming off a pretty bad outing after he had a decent run for a little bit. He was kind of alternating good and bad starts, though, so I don't know. And that would have been one of his bad starts against the Mets, so he might be in line for a better start. But, of course, Miami is familiar with him. Miami actually kind of knocked him around back in April, hitting him up for 6 runs, although he had an 8-1 strikeout walk ratio in that game, but 7 hits. So maybe he allowed more runs than what he should have based on the rest of the stats there. The strikeout walk ratio is pretty good in that one. And overall, his stats are good against Miami. They only hit 150 off of him in 40 at-bats, 427 OPS. So I wouldn't really want to fade Morton necessarily with this really weak Miami lineup either, but Miami would be the side I'd look to there. And then St. Louis, Chicago. Hey, I'm talking about every game except Colorado, LA, Colorado, Anaheim, because who cares about that game? I have no read on that game at all. St. Louis, Chicago, I kind of lean to an under just because this is a matchup of 2 really good pitchers, man. I mean, it's Sonny Gray for St. Louis. He's their ace. Shota Imanaga is pitching for the Cubs, and he's basically their ace, even though he's a rookie. I think, yeah, you could say he qualifies as their ace because he's doing so well this year. There is familiarity here, though, so that's the thing. If you want to take an under here, you're playing it because these are 2 really good pitchers, but there is familiarity as well. I think these pitchers are so good that it trumps the familiarity aspect of it and the fact that these offenses have faced these pitchers before. St. Louis has faced Imanaga already this year, too, so Imanaga has been unfamiliar to a lot of the lineups that he's faced this year, and the first time he faced St. Louis, that was the case, but now St. Louis has faced him once, and it wasn't that long ago. So they're more familiar with him, so that might take a little bit of an edge away from Imanaga. But I still think that the fact that these pitchers are both really good trumps the fact that they're familiar to the opposing hitters. So that is something to keep in mind there. And both of these starters do have pretty good numbers historically against these opposing lineups. So I do like the under in that one to some extent. My camera continues to go out of focus. Gotta love that. That's awesome. I don't know what we can even do about that. All right. And then I guess I'll mention that the NFL Hall of Fame game is today, of course. It's the start of preseason. The Hall of Fame game, first game of preseason, an isolated game. Hey, that means Hard Knocks, the regular Hard Knocks preseason is coming back right after the new Hard Knocks offseason just ended with the New York Giants. The final episode of that, huge deal, man. It was covering what they did in the NFL draft. I don't know if that is going to continue to be a thing, the Hard Knocks offseason. It's definitely the least entertaining of the Hard Knocks. I don't even know who it's going to be in the preseason this year. I knew at some point it might actually be the Chicago Bears. I'm not sure, but the Bears are playing tonight in this Hall of Fame game against the Houston Texans. This line has moved all over the place. At one point, the Bears are a 4-point favorite, and I think that was probably some early opening line before we knew what was really going to be happening in this game. But now it's Texans -1, juiced a little bit. Texans are public with 62% of the tickets, 56% of the cash. So I think they're public with a little bit less of the cash. So that maybe tells you that the Texans are maybe being a little bit overvalued coming into this game because they're basically thriving off of last year's performance where they made the playoffs and they had a really good blowout win in the playoffs over Cleveland. So everybody kind of remembers that. Oh, the Texans are good now, man. They have a high-flying offense with C.J. Stroud, so people like that. But then, of course, people know the Bears drafted Caleb Williams, but Stroud, we know what he is now after he's got a year under his belt. But it's pointless to even really talk about those things because neither of those guys are going to be playing in this game. I don't think the first preseason game, teams don't tend to play their starters, even though I think the NFL probably would like them to. They make this isolated Hall of Fame game. Like, oh, yeah, we get C.J. Stroud against Caleb Williams. It's going to be awesome. No, these teams don't want to get these guys hurt. There's no reason to play these guys in the first game. So you're going to wind up with, I think, Davis Mills, I think, is probably the Texans quarterback up against Tyson Bagent. Baggins. I don't know how you pronounce Bilbo Baggins. I don't know how you pronounce that guy's name. Though those are going to be the starting pitchers. Those are going to be the starting quarterbacks. I'm still in baseball mode, man. Forgive me. So this game is really hard to handicap. Preseason, it usually comes down to which team you think is going to play their better players for a longer amount of time in the game. And in this game, I think it's a total toss-up. Which one of those quarterbacks is better? Who knows? They've both played a little bit in the NFL already. I know Bagent was one of these guys who I think he might have come from an FCS school, maybe even. He wasn't expected to be any good, or maybe even a Division II school. I don't even remember, but he came in and played a little bit because of an injury last year. I don't even remember who the Bears quarterback was last year. Unfortunately, I can't remember anything now. My brain is totally melting down. But I don't know what we're going to get out of either of those quarterbacks, to be honest. Bagent is just kind of fun because his name is ridiculous and he's coming from a lesser school, and it's just fun to see a guy coming from out of nowhere like that and succeeding to any extent in the NFL, really. And plus, he has the white boy summer look to him, the white boy summer attitude with that long hair and whatever. I think he might have won one of his games that he played last year. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see what goes on in that game, I guess. That's going to do it, man. That's kind of the rundown of what's going on today. I don't have any plays. Once I do, which is probably going to be on tomorrow's baseball card, I got to get back and start winning, man, because this is a lost year at this point. I think at this point, with 4 months left in the year, I don't think I'm going to have a winning year. I think this is going to be my second losing year ever. It's just too far in the tank. I can't figure out what is even going on. We'll see what happens. Have a good day. Peace.